Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 31. Today in the show, we're talking about how our 2014 rut hunts have been going so far, and then we'll answer your questions on how we hunt this time of year. Enjoy. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. Today in the show, we're talking about the rut. And joining me is my trusty co-host, Dan Johnson. How's it going, buddy?
It's going pretty good. Let's see, I'm not at work for 2 straight weeks, so I will be in a tree stand instead. So that's really awesome, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's kind of the best of all possible worlds. I mean, every time we talk on this show, you always say you're doing pretty good because you're not in work, but now you're not at work and you're hunting. So life's good.
I guess if there is any downside, it's I'm away from the family, and I'm away from my daughter, and it's kind of I don't want to say sad or to bring the mood down, but she was walking around the house the other day looking for me, going, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," and that kind of sucks, but seeing awesome deer movement is good. So, not comparing my daughter to awesome deer movement, but I think you know what I'm trying to go for here.
I do. Just as long as your wife doesn't listen to this show, we're all good.
Oh, she doesn't.
Well, this is actually a first for us, Dan. For the first time, we are both recording this podcast remotely. So I am in a random hotel room in southern Ohio, and you are at your deer camp in...
I'm at my parents' house, and I'm sleeping on a blow-up bed in, I guess you could call it a man cave, where my stepdad hangs all his mounts and like stuffed ducks and stuff. Fish, and he has a bobcat fur on the wall, and shedding hers. So, yeah.
That's pretty cool. I remember going down when I was down there this spring, checking out that room. It's a pretty good spot to crash, I'd say.
Right. I even gave you the bed, Mark, because you were such an honored guest, and I took the couch. Remember that?
I do remember that. I appreciate it, Dan. It was... I know that was a sacrifice, so I appreciate it.
I'm back for a couple of days after that. just to let you know.
Now I feel really bad about that whole trip. So.
Oh, don't worry about it.
All right, thank you. Thanks for letting me off the hook there. So, you're down there in Iowa. I'm down here in Ohio, and we're on these little trips because it is the rut. So, I guess without beating around the bush anymore, I think we need to talk about how our hunting's been. When we're recording this, today is November 4th, and this show is going to go live on November 6th. So, Dan, I know you've been hunting for a while now. I've been hunting since the 28th of October, pretty much every day. But I guess I'm curious to hear from you first, Dan. How's the hunting been? What have you been seeing? How's the rut progressing in your neck of the woods?
Well, I tell you what, every day is getting better up here. As far as encounters are concerned, we have been in the right place every single hunt. Just the wrong deer are coming through. So we've seen tons of yearlings, 2-year-olds. Last night we had a great encounter with a 3-year-old who was a borderline. But we couldn't tell if he was 3 or 4. He was probably somewhere around the 130 mark as a 10,
Nice.
maybe 135, 140, and Ryan ended up passing him. I've seen chasing, not hard chasing, but basically scent checking. They're scent checking these does right now, waiting for the first ones to pop. I think I think that 3-year-old told us something last night, and it was he was chasing this doe, he caught up to her, and then he let her go. If that doe was hot or even close, he would have been dogging her. And I think that, and I'm still seeing groups of does. I'm not seeing a single doe by themselves. So what I'm seeing where I'm hunting is right now these bucks are hitting those scrapes. They're getting ready because I think it's going to happen tomorrow, maybe Thursday, Friday. It's going to just explode here pretty soon. It's like you can feel it when you go into the timber.
Man, so what's Ryan thinking about all this? Because, for those listeners who maybe haven't been following along for a while, you are actually cameraman on this trip for your buddy Ryan. So has he been having a blast? Is the Iowa hunt turning out as good as he was hoping it would?
Oh yeah. I can't speak for him, but I asked him if he's happy and having fun, and he tells me yeah. He passed a deer last night that would have been the biggest buck that he's ever shot. So it tells me he's serious about it, and it's just a matter of time till we have an encounter with a 4-year-old or older. And I asked him, I said, dude, you can shoot whatever you want. I don't care. It's your hunt. You want to shoot a spike horn, you can shoot a spike horn. If you want to hold out for a really mature giant, you can do that. But I think what we've discussed is he's saying he wants at least a 4-year-old and somewhere around the 140-inch mark. So if those two things come together, he's gonna have an opportunity, I feel, in the next couple of days.
Dude,
but yeah, he's having a blast.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that the hunt's gone well and he's having fun. And man, that's awesome that he was able to see a buck that would have been the biggest he's ever taken a shot at, and has the confidence in the upcoming week or two of hunting left that he can get a shot at a better one. So I certainly think it's possible. I mean, knowing what you have down there, so that's awesome. And
the good thing is that we both have until the end of next week. So we have another week yet of hunting, which is good.
Yeah. You've got, a week and a half of hunting, really, right?
Yep, week and a half. And I'll tell you right now, our trail cameras that we check maybe once every, we're checking a different trail camera every day, but the trail cameras that we are checking over scrapes, the big boys are still hitting them. The fence crossings and some of the other places, the mature giants, that are on our hit list are still in the area. They're still hitting those scrapes. So that tells me right now that these bucks are not hooked up with does yet. Yeah. Once those scrapes kind of dry up for a little bit, I think that's when you're going to start seeing that, I guess, the rut. What I would consider the rut, the chasing, when they don't need to worry about their scent anymore, leaving their scent, they're chasing does.
Yeah. Man, well, I'm glad that you're seeing some activity and that you're seeing some progress, and thank goodness that you had something to talk about, because I have really nothing in the way of any kind of buck sightings, trail camera pictures, rut activity, anything to talk about. It's I think we got a tale of two cities.
Indiana a bust?
I don't want to say a bust
because Indiana a bust then?
I don't want to say a bust because that just sounds bad. But it was not good. I mean, taking a step back, I hunted like 3 days in Michigan before I took off, and that was, I just saw some does and a forkhorn. So that was poor, and all my cameras still in Michigan. I've got cameras all over the place, and every single camera is just the same darn deer. I've got a bunch of little bucks, bunch of does, still not a single absolute for sure shooter. There's an 8-pointer that might be borderline, but that's it. So it's just more of the same for the past 3-4 months. So Michigan continues to disappoint, and so as we talked about last time, I think headed down to Indiana southeastern Indiana, and was down there for the past 5 days. And man, it's just been unbelievably slow. I saw a handful of does and one spike over the course of the entire period of hunting. I didn't see a single buck other than that spike, and just like I said, a couple does. Just really, really, really slow. Just not even. I don't even know. I don't even know what to say. Just very slow. I think a combination of a couple things. I think, the rut definitely is not rolling down here yet, at least in the specific area where I was at, because, I did see a couple does here and there, but never once was there a buck following. Never once was there a buck anywhere in the remote vicinity, of course. Number two, there seems to be an issue with trespassers on the property I was hunting, because my buddy, whose property this is, that he has permission on, one section of his climbing sticks was stolen, because I showed up at this tree stand to hunt it in the morning, and the bottom section of sticks wasn't there. And so I had to jump up and grab the second section, which was like 7 feet up, and then shimmy up the tree to get up to that stick. So that was fun. And then the next day we found
Holy
out...
cow.
Yeah. And then the next day we found out that someone had stolen one of his double bull ground blinds that he had out there too. And we had just seen them like a day or two beforehand. We'd walked by and seen both the stand and that ground blind. And so, while I was out there hunting, someone had come in and stolen this stuff. So that's upsetting, and certainly could be part of the reason why the deer activity was so slow, if there's some yahoo walking around stealing stuff and messing things around. So that was that. And on top of all those things, this property is essentially a strip of timber with a big creek bottom in the middle of it, and there's fields on either side. And normally be a really good funnel property, because there's beans on either side, and if that was the case, there should be deer moving through this chunk of timber, because it's the only timber that really connects anything in this whole area. But right next door to us is like a 500-acre field of standing corn, and I just think that if there was any real activity going on, I think a lot of it was going on in that standing corn, because just given what I know about the property and the deer that my friend has been seeing down there before I got there, earlier in the year when the deer were feeding on the beans and stuff, there are a lot of deer in the area, and there's a lot of good mature bucks in the area, and there just was absolutely none of that happening while I was down there. So it was a little frustrating. I was sitting there for a couple of the days I sat there all day, 12, 13 hours on stand, and most of it not seeing anything at all. So not the best start to my rut hunting vacation.
Right.
But
yeah, that sucks when that happens.
Yeah, so it goes. That's hunting, and I don't know how it is for you in Iowa. It's probably different than some of the spots I'm hunting, but it just seems so often it's so hot and cold. It'll be, for me, I'll have long stretches of really horrible, tough hunting, and then every once in a while I'll get hit with that action and that excitement that you dream of. And so I'm weathering those lows right now and hoping to hit a high here soon. So that's what I'm hoping for now, because I just drove down this afternoon down to southern Ohio, relocating to Ohio to my lease, and hoping for big things to come here in the next 8 days I have to hunt here.
Yeah. Well, it's still pretty early. Like I said, I don't think a majority. I think there is breeding going on, and I can speak from my area. There is breeding going on. The very first does are in heat right now, and some of the bigger one, the biggest, baddest buck has got her, and they're probably locked down right now. But everybody else is still jockeying for position, waiting for those next does. So, to all the listeners out there, find the does and you'll find the bucks.
Yeah, that's the name of the game this time of year. That's for sure. And that's something I mentioned. I wrote an article earlier this week on Wired to Hunt about what to do when the rut is not rocking. It's kind of me writing reminders to myself, because I was going through this kind of tough spell. And so I was kind of thinking through, trying to reset myself. And one of the big things I kept coming back to is you need to go back to basics. Like when things aren't going well and during the rut, and it sounds like everyone else is having, action and seeing activity, and you just aren't. It's easy to panic. It's easy to kind of scramble for new ideas and new answers and new tactics and strategies and some crazy off-the-wall new thing, just kind of reaching for something. But I think during this time of year, you have to go back to the core, which is does. Bucks are either going to be where the does are, or they're traveling to where the does are. And so if you focus on those two things, always make sure your strategy revolves around one of those two things, and just keep on keeping on. Put the time in, focus on those two aspects of it, and eventually it'll pan out if you put the time in. And I think that's what it comes down to this time of year.
Yeah, it is way too early to throw a Hail Mary at this point in the season, because the does are just getting warmed up, and that seems to be the theme. This is, I guess, what you would call the pre-rut. I mean, the scrapes, they're still working scrapes. They're scent checking the does. They're jockeying for position, and in the next couple of days, when it pops off, that's when you want to be in the tree stand.
Yeah, I'm hoping it happens here soon. We got a big cold front pushing through over the next couple of days here in Ohio, and I gotta believe that should really get things going. So I'm very excited to see what happens down here.
Yep. Well, and it's one of those things where, yeah, the cold weather helps, but if the does aren't ready, the does aren't ready. So I mean, that weather's going to help, but you can't. It's not like you can trigger the rut. There's anything to do. You just have to be patient and wait.
Yeah, I think the only thing that the weather does do is it can affect how much daylight activity you're seeing. I think that a lot of rutting activity will happen during the dark if it's really warm. Like it's been the 60s the last 2 days here, which I think slowed things down. But you're right. In the end, it does come down to where those does are and the timing of that whole thing, which is, like you said, it's not triggered by some other factor like weather. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting. Some exciting times in the coming week or two. And, man, I'm hoping that you and I will have some good stories to tell here on our next podcast, hopefully, because, gosh, really, for a lot of people, our seasons are, it's make or break in this next week or two. This is really what we've been working towards for, 10 months or whatever it was to get back to this point from last season. So big time stuff coming up. So, with all that, I'm going to say that being said, well, drink another one.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being, well, man, I'm struggling. So that being said,
are you delirious?
Kind of. I've been waking up at like 4 a.m. for seven straight days so far, so I'm struggling. I'm tired. But what I want to talk about today, now that we've covered the progress of how our rut hunts are going and, how the rutting activity has been looking, I wanted to talk about how you and me actually hunt during the rut. Last week we talked to Scott Bestel. He shared his perspectives, but today I want to share our own opinions and experiences. So what I did was post a question on our Facebook page yesterday asking our listeners and readers to share, what questions they would like us to answer. So what we've got here today is like 20 or 30 different questions from our listeners, all related to the rut. And I thought maybe you and me, Dan, can bounce around through here and take a stab at a couple of these different questions and kind of see where the conversation takes us from there. What do you think?
Sounds good. I'm game for that, and if you don't mind, I would like to start the show. Start the question asking.
That sounds good, Dan. Take it away.
All right. Well, this is kind of going to cover a lot of these questions, or not a lot of them, but there's a lot of questions here that I'm seeing in regards to hunting field edges, and I want to tell those people right now that if you are strictly hunting field edges, you are missing out on a ton of deer movement. I think of a food plot or a field edge as a destination. Okay, so if you're not hunting pinch points or travel corridors or bedding areas, I would say you're missing out on over 80% of the deer movement in a total day. So maybe that's all you have available, or maybe you have a permanent stand, or I hope this doesn't sound bad, but maybe you just don't want to put in the extra work to do that. But some of these questions here about, how should I hunt field edges? I don't hunt field edges. Go try something different. Go take your stand down, move it into the timber, try to find a pinch point or a ridge with some sign on it, and it's going to open up a whole new world to you.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on a lot of those things, but where are you seeing these questions about field edges? I don't see anything about this in our notes, Dan. Just random aside note.
I thought maybe I was reading on the Facebook page too. I said some guy said something about I'm not seeing deer movement till last light. I'm hunting over a scrape and a trail camera, and I'm not seeing all the activities after dark.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, it's after dark because you're hunting on a field edge. So, I don't know.
So that's your...
Maybe we should just edit everything out I just said.
Well, we know your opinion on field edges. You do not like them, and during the
there
rut.
We go.
And Dan says, get away from field edges during the rut. And
I don't know about you, Mark, but I am delirious tired right now.
Hey, I'm right there with you.
I think you and a lot of the other people are as well.
Yep.
So I should have never led. I'm sorry. I know my place. I'm the sidekick. I'm not the host. Mark, I'll let you go. I'll let you take it from here.
No, you were doing great. I was just curious about where it was coming from. Oh man, that's funny. But it's interesting you say this stuff because there are some situations where people, that's all they have to hunt, and in some situations, field edge hunting can work during the rut. And right. I know you don't do very much of it, but I mean, on my lease down here in Ohio, we have a lot of edge cover. There's not a whole lot of timber. It's a lot of small fingers and edge with fields. They're secluded fingers of fields and whatnot. But because of that, 50% of the time, we have to hunt an edge with a field. But we're still seeing mature bucks. So I think it all depends on the terrain and the pressure in the area and where you're hunting and what the situation is. But you're right. If in the case that if you're hunting a big old block of open ag and you're not seeing deer till dark, that's a great sign that you need to push in deeper to get to where that daylight activity is. On the other hand, if you're seeing a 4-year-old buck cruising down the finger or a finger of, cut beans during the middle of the day, go for it if that's what they're doing. So I think it's an interesting thing to look at.
Every piece of property is different, so it's hard for me and you to give advice to somebody when we don't know all the information. Yeah.
And that's the story for all the different topics we take and tackle here.
Yep.
We'll share our perspectives given the experience that we have, and then, of course, anyone listening is going to have to take what they can take from it and apply whatever is relatable to their situation. So let's move on to another topic, I think, Dan, that you equally hate. Todd Bowen on our Facebook page asked, do you ever make midday stand adjustments or just completely change stands if the action isn't up to par in the morning? Now, I say you hate this because you hate midday sits. So I want to kind of take a two-part question here. Number one, I want to, again, Dan, get your thoughts on hunting the middle of the day. Will you ever hunt the middle of the day, or is it just totally taboo because your knees and everything? So that's part one. And then part two, let's talk about those midday stand adjustments that Todd asked about.
Okay. Well, first off, I'm opposed to, for a majority of the time, I'm opposed to all-day sits. And what I mean by all-day sits is getting in the stand in the morning and hunting it until dark. I do. Today, we were in the stand at noon. So we got out of the timber at 9 and went and grabbed a bite to eat, and then we were back in the timber at 12 noon. And we were seeing movement at about 2 o'clock. When we started seeing a steady movement. I think tonight we saw 5 or 6 different bucks and 3 does, so 3 or 4 does. But if you're not seeing activity, for me, unless you know that there's going to be a deer coming through at some point, if you have facts, if you have trail camera information, that's the only way I would wait it out all day. But now it's still early enough to where they're probably still in some food to bed pattern, and these bucks are starting to fall in line between following these does from their bed to the food and back to bed. That there's still, in my opinion, 2 good parts of the day to be in a stand, in the morning and in the afternoon. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still going to be those cruisers, but I think the mature bucks right now are still in some kind of pattern with those does.
Okay. You know, I have a couple thoughts on what you said there.
Okay.
First off, I can't believe you're getting out of the woods at 9 a.m. Aren't you?
This morning I hunted a travel corridor that I was literally, I was probably inside 100 yards off of a road. So I was waiting for these deer to work their way through. They worked their way through, and then that's it. Then you get out. So it was kind of one of those things where you're not going to see any movement midday. I could see when the lady turned her light on in the kitchen this morning. That's how close to the house I was.
Nice. So I guess to the midday sits, here's my perspective on this. And I agree with you that no matter when, the middle of the day or during the rut is a lower percentage sit than your evening and your morning sits, right? Deer are crepuscular, meaning they move the most, early in the morning and late in the evening at the edges of darkness, and that's always going to be the case. But during the rut, as we all know, we always hear about, there is increased movement on occasion by mature deer during the middle of the day. And so my one disagreement with you, Dan, is that you said that you would never stay out there unless you knew for a fact that there was a big buck moving in the middle of the day because of a trail camera picture or something like that. And my argument would be that these midday movements are relatively rare, and you never know when it's going to happen. And that's why, for me, I feel like if I'm not out there, that maybe that big buck is only going to come through one time over the course of 12 days in November. If I'm not there that one time, I missed that one opportunity maybe I had for the entire year. And I realize that's a relatively low percentage sit compared to the morning or evening. But for me, at least, during this 2-week period of, the 1st of November through the 14th or 15th of November, I take the brute force approach. I put everything in, and I'm saying this is the absolute best chance at a mature deer. And it might be just a personality thing, but for me, I feel guilty if I'm not in the woods the entire day, taking every single possible opportunity I have. I feel like I'm not giving it my all, and I feel like I'm doing myself a disservice, or I'm not working hard enough. And so even though it's a low percentage sit, there's a possibility of it, and there's a higher possibility at this time of year than at any other time of year. And so I'm willing to push it during that time when it's not fun. It's not the best of hunting action. 90% of the time it's dull and you don't see anything, and it's a waste. Not a waste, but you're not actually seeing a big deer. But I've had enough times between the 1st of November and the 15th, even the 23rd or 24th of November, where I have had mature deer come through between 11 and 1 that I never would have seen otherwise. But I mean, I'm kind of arguing something that I argue myself too all the time. I mean, it's just tough.
Yeah.
It's tough to justify because it's hard to do, and 99% of people, wouldn't enjoy it. But for me, I've kind of defined my own rut hunting strategy as brute force. Like I'm gonna kill a deer just because I'm just stupidly persistent enough to get it done. I think is kind of what I try to do, and so by putting those long hours, that helps me get a little bit of an edge on that front. But that's just me.
Mass coverage. Statistically, the more time you spend in the woods, the more chance you're going to have at deer. For me, it all comes back to what deer you have in the area, what you know about your property. And for me, I know that I'm going to move from basically and hunting these properties for a long, 7, 8, 9 years. I know when the movement is going to happen. There are certain spots that are historically better in the mornings, and there are spots that are historically better in the evenings. So I don't know. It's one of those things that every person's different. Every property is different. Everybody has a different scenario that they're dealing with.
Yeah, I think an important point to make too is that when I say I'm hunting all day, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to stay in the same stand the entire time. Because to your point,
right.
Lots of times there's going to be some stands that are great for the morning, some that are better for the evening, and then there's even sometimes stands that are great during the middle of the day, but maybe aren't perfect for either other side of the things. So to Todd's question here, I would say I absolutely do make midday stand adjustments. Just for instance, on This past Saturday, I hunted real close to a bedding area, downwind of a bedding area in the morning till about 1 o'clock, I think it was. And then at 1 o'clock, I moved and got downwind of a food source where hopefully I could catch a buck cruising downwind to scent check any does that might go feeding out in there. So if you are going to stay out all day, or either way, I mean, the same things that apply during the early season or the middle of the season apply during the rut, that being, you're going to have some different types of activity in different areas at different times of the day. So it's important to adjust for that.
That's fact.
Yeah, so I guess it was a roundabout way of answering Todd's question. We both kind of went on off our tangents there, but...
Well, no, and I think me and you are even in agreement. We're making adjustments, whether it's a completely different stand or moving to a different area within that larger area. Yes, we're making adjustments, and we're, you are sitting some all day sits, but it's not like what I'm doing is that much different from you. I'm just leaving the woods for an hour or two and then coming back. So I don't know. The way I hunt is I'm going to a stand location where I feel I have the highest percentage of intercepting a mature buck.
I think that's a sound strategy.
Yeah, buddy.
All right, you want to take a swing at one of these, Dan? Which one's next?
Let's see. We got Alex Slosser. Do different buck personalities affect how you hunt them during the rut? Well, for me, it's kind of hard to tell because I do feel that different bucks have different personalities. For example, me and Ryan were talking about this. We have a buck, actually, the name of this buck is Mark Kenyon, and he's been showing up on a couple of trail cameras pretty regularly, still at night, but it's over top of the scrape. And he's busted up already. So that tells me he's probably fighting, which means to me that there's a chance that he might come into calling, like a rattling sequence or an aggressive grunt call. So there's that possibility. Now, there's other deer who I have never had daylight pictures of them, never seen them in daylight, but they're giants, and they're somewhere. They're kind of just hard to pattern. And a hunter myself, I've learned the hard way on a lot of these things. But overcalling can damage a sit. Maybe not calling, not being aggressive at the right times can let an opportunity pass. I know that it's hard to read their body and know what they're thinking. If they're at a scrape, if they're thrashing a bush or a tree, that might be an opportunity to try calling. If they're real skittish and they come into an area with their head up, their ears they're already alert, that might be a bad time to call. I don't know. What are your experiences, Mark?
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you, Dan. Like you said, bucks definitely have different personalities, and the challenge is just, to what degree can you understand that personality and then adjust for it. So I think, for anyone listening, if you've got a buck that you've got lots of trail camera pictures of and you've had numerous encounters where you've been able to see how he interacts and what his behavioral patterns are, keep that in your kind of in your hard drive, and then you apply that when you're hunting the rut. So exactly like you said, if there's a buck that you think's all busted up because he's been fighting, that's definitely someone you might want to be more aggressive with. So I think that's a great point to make. I also think, and this isn't necessarily related to a personality of a specific buck, but I think also, I'm kind of adding on to the question here, but I think also the areas where you hunt, how in general bucks will behave will be different, and that should affect how you hunt during the rut. So what I'm saying here is, let's say, taking for example my situation versus yours, in Michigan, much lower number of mature deer, significantly higher number of hunters per square mile. So you've got a lot of younger deer, and you've got whatever deer are older, they have encountered many hunters. So in an area like that, these deer are very gun shy. They're very, any hunter shy. So aggressive calling, aggressive rattling, decoying, anything like that is absolutely, in my experience, very high risk and doesn't pay off nearly as much as it might in an area in another state like Ohio or Iowa, where maybe the hunting pressure is a little lower and where there's a higher number of older age class bucks, where those deer are used to fighting other bucks. They're used to maybe not having quite as many interactions with hunters. So I think in addition to individual buck personality, you also need to consider the overall population of bucks and how they might interact with the world and how that might change how you hunt. So definitely I'm hunting differently during the rut here in Ohio versus where I am back home in Michigan. And then both of those places, then if I know something about a certain buck, that will also then impact how I hunt if I see that deer.
Right.
So
makes sense.
Yeah. So here's a question from Dustin Hodgkin, and he wanted us to compare and discuss your rut hunting facial hair versus my rut hunting facial hair, Dan.
Hey, did Dustin kill this year already?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I saw his buck. That's a pretty good one.
Yeah, he got a real nice, I think it's an 8-pointer here in Michigan on, it was either Halloween or the day before Halloween. We'll have the video of it up on Wired to Hunt here pretty soon. It's pretty cool how it all happened. I won't give away any details, but yeah, he got a nice Michigan buck.
Awesome. Congratulations if you're listening.
Yeah, absolutely. So in all seriousness, though, you've got a heck of a lot better rut beard than I do.
I don't have a beard anymore, Mark. I come the first day of my vacation, the night before the first day of my vacation, which is typically Halloween, there's an event that I call dropping the hammer. And that is when I shave my mustache. So, and I hope I don't sound cocky or vain, but my facial hair crushes your facial hair. If there was a fight between our facial hair, my facial hair would win. And it would either be like by just a gruesome knockout or some weird, sick submission where I would break your facial hair's arms and legs.
I'm speechless. I cannot argue that in any way, shape, or form. I have the facial hair of a 12-year-old. So you win, hands down. You take the cake.
Next question.
Click. Oh, man. You go ahead and pick, Dan.
All right, let's see here. We already covered calling question. Here's a question from Matt Conway. If you had to pick a particular time of the day to hunt the rut, what would it be?
I'll go
let you
first.
start, Mark.
Yeah, perfect. I was gonna say, if I had to pick my favorite time, it's gonna be mornings. I think that even on those days when the temperatures do get higher, that are usually not your great days, the mornings still are the coolest part of the day. Can still have that action that you're looking for, and it just seems that the deer move a little bit later in the mornings during the rut than at any other time of year. So you're going to get a longer period of movement those first few hours of daylight versus maybe in the evening where it's maybe the last hour. So I love a good cold rut morning when you're catching those bucks coming back to the bedding areas, checking for does. I don't think you can beat that, in my opinion. What do you think?
I'm going to have to agree with you. I used to be a big fan of evening hunts, and then as I became a more serious hunter, I realized that mornings are the place to be. You can get away with more going in. The deer are already on their feet, and for the most part, they're not going to be in the area that you're at, that you're going to. They're going to be coming to you or traveling through your area. So, again, with the rut, there's so many things that can go wrong. They could already be there, but there's room for error, and what I mean by that is you can get busted in the morning and still have a chance of seeing something, in my opinion. Whether you get busted from your scent or from movement or whatever the reason may be, I think there's a little bit of forgiveness with a morning hunt.
Yeah, and it's just, man, it's hard to beat those really cold, frosty mornings when just as daylight starts to, come across the timber, you start hearing those footsteps coming your way, and you just know this could be it. I mean, that's a pretty special time.
Yeah. Yep.
So, how about this one? Got a question from Jeff Kurth, and he asked us to detail our top 5 favorite setups or locations. And we don't necessarily have 5 different setups, but can you go through for me, Dan, what your favorite stand locations look like during the rut, and then I'll share mine. I think we probably have a lot in common here, but let's walk through those in some detail.
Well, in my opinion, I was looking at this question earlier, and I only think there's 3 that the hunter should be worried about. Bedding areas, travel corridors, and what I mean by travel corridors, I mean maybe even 2, because you could put travel corridors and a pinch point kind of in the same category. And if you're a field edge hunter, you can hunt a destination, which would be a field edge, or maybe in the southern states, maybe a watering hole or something like that. But bedding areas and travel corridors, for the most part, are what I'm hunting this week and next week.
So tell me more details, though. Tell me more about how are you setting up on these different spots? What do you mean when you say travel corridor?
Yeah, travel corridor, pinch point, a place where you're going to find cruising deer, a place where terrain narrows down enough to condense the movement, so you're going to be seeing more deer. Let's see, it was 2 nights ago, we dropped off a ridge where, and I wrote an article about it on the Nine Finger Chronicles called Pinch Point, where a field with a fence butts up against a ridge that drops down into a bend of a river, and it just narrows it down to about 100 yards. Everything goes through here at some point. And when they really start cruising, when they really start looking for does, my trail cameras in this area just start heating up. And we have a stand down in one of those locations, and that's a typical rut stand. if you're gonna be sitting all day long, that's where you want to sit all day long, because it condenses everything down, and it just two giant pieces of property. It brings it all together in this one little piece. And I guess the next one would be a bedding area. And I love hunting bedding areas in the mornings, because if a doe is already at bed in the evening, she's going to be the deer are already going to be there, so you have a chance of spooking them. I love getting there in the morning on the downwind side and catching the bucks cruise through, or the does come through. The bucks will follow. They're scent checking these bedding areas, and they're looking for the hot does. And tonight was a perfect example of where we were at. We were on the backside of a bedding area, and we watched 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 4 deer, a yearling, 2 2-year-olds, and a 3-year-old come through this area, and they were all doing the same thing. All had their nose to the ground, checking the scent in the air, and without having to go in, they just are able to cover a lot of property and finding a hot doe.
Yeah. I think something you said there is, I think, such an important concept for hunting the rut. And it's something we all love to talk about, hunting the rut, and we've all seen a million articles, and I've written a million articles, and we've talked about the rut for several different podcasts here. So there's a lot of things to talk about, but it really does come down to a few basic things. And you said those things right there. It comes down to doe bedding areas, it comes down to doe feeding areas, and then the travel corridors in or around any one of those two things. And so when it comes to my setups, whenever I think about setting somewhere up, it needs to be in relation to one of those three factors. So I need to be downwind of a bedding area, I need to be downwind of a food source, or I need to be in a pinch point or travel corridor that connects one or the other, or bedding area to bedding area. And where I hunt, one of those three, will be determined based on activity I've seen, based on time of day, any other factors like that. For me, I really don't pay much attention at all to rub lines or scrapes or stuff like that during the rut. We've talked about this a little bit in the past, but a lot of that sign is created at night. Of course, some of it happens during daylight, and there's certain situations and certain circumstances where people, have had, that definitely do have success using some of that in their strategy. But for me, I try to keep it simple. I try to find, the best possible spots that I can set up to have the wind in my favor in an area where the deer thinks they're using the wind in their favor to check an area for does, and or to travel between those spots. And so I keep it pretty simple, and I'll rotate through different areas like that as the wind goes. And really, that's what my rut hunting setups look like. They come in different forms and fashions, but they're all related to one of those three things. One other setup that I know a lot of guys have success with in certain areas are little water holes or small ponds back in secluded cover closer to bedding and stuff during the rut. I haven't personally had any areas that have a situation like this, but I've heard a lot of times people will see bucks that have been cruising throughout the day, midday or late morning. They'll stop by these water holes that are back in the cover near bedding areas because they've been cruising all day or chasing does. They're checking, just need a little extra water. So sometimes those can be, a little bit of something to center in on when you say, okay, I want to be downwind of this bedding area for the morning. Oh, by the way, there's also this little water hole right here. That's a doubly good spot then to be, because that's the best spot in the downwind section. So I think you can utilize some of these like secondary factors to improve upon, the first factor being that bedding area, food source, etc. But across the board, when it comes to setups, I'm thinking about those three basic categories and then narrowing it down from there.
Yep. I think we covered just about all of them.
Yeah, there's, again, I just think we sometimes, work our way into circles when we start talking about hunting the rut. It's pretty basically simple. Get in those basic spots, put in the time, and that's what really comes down to. So that said, though, there are some different tricks of the trade and things that you can do to improve upon your odds of success in a situation like that. And there's a question here from Taylor Oxendahl, I believe it is how say that name. And the question is, are there any disadvantages to using a decoy during the rut? And we talked a little bit about decoying last week, Dan. I know you don't do a whole lot of it, so I'll share my perspective on this because I've done a decent little bit now recently, and I've read a lot about it and talked to a lot of people about it. And so, yes, I would say there definitely are some disadvantages to using a decoy. And the big disadvantage is that it can spook deer, especially does. From my experience and from what I've heard from a number of other people, that's the most common thing that's going to happen is does will come into the field, before any bucks do, and they see the decoy. They get closer to it. They start circling around it. They're stomping around, trying to get it to move. It doesn't move. They eventually get spooky, and they clear the field, or they start snorting, or they, get uncomfortable. And if that happens, that could hurt your chances of a buck ever making an appearance and coming out there and actually seeing the decoy and getting interested in it. So I think there's that inherent risk at all times. So for me, I factored two things into my decision on whether or not I'm going to use a decoy. Number one, it's got to be the right time of year, and that right time of the year is now. This kind of first couple weeks in November when those bucks are feeling a little bit frisky or not frisky, but kind of feisty, I guess, and wanting to duke it out. So this time of year, I would consider using decoy. But then I'm also going to be thinking about what's the population dynamics where I'm hunting. So, for example, in Michigan, on one of my properties there, I've got a huge doe population. Tons and tons of does, too many does, not as many bucks. And I know if I'm setting a decoy out in a field, there's going to be 10, 15, 20, 25 different does that are going to be coming out into that area. And every darn one of them, I'm pretty sure, is going to see that decoy and start making a commotion about it. So that's a situation where I would never use a decoy because I know I'm going to be spooking deer with it. Now, on the opposite side, on my Ohio lease, really low population, at least relatively low population of does. I might hunt a full day and not see a single doe, but I might see 3 or 4 bucks during the rut. So this is a perfect situation for a decoy because there's a much lower chance of spooking does, but if I do see a buck, there's a really high probability he's going to come in and check out this contender. So I'm definitely thinking through those two things when it comes to using a decoy. Another question that someone had asked was, should they put both antlers on the decoy or just one or none? And I read about this. I think I might have mentioned it on one of the podcasts earlier in the year. But I'd read from a couple different people and got some tips from a couple folks about using just one antler on your decoy, in that's kind of a sweet spot where it's, with that antler, it's enough to get a buck riled up. He sees another buck. But at the same time, if that deer is maybe not the most aggressive buck in the world, he still won't be intimidated by a one-antlered buck. So you've got a good chance of bringing in just about any deer versus if you've got a huge double, 2 big antlers, that might spook off a few bucks. So I go with the one-antler route. But that's just me and from what I've heard. So something to think about there. I'm definitely going to be testing out the decoy here in the next week in Ohio, and I've got high hopes for it. So I guess hopefully I'll have more to report on that in the coming days.
Cool. Hope it works.
Me too. So what's next, Dan?
Let's see here. I just scanned all the way down to the bottom. And it's kind of funny that this question was asked because all day in the stand, me and Ryan are chit-chatting about products and talking about what works, what doesn't work. And Christopher Randall asks, dump your backpack out and empty the pockets of your Sitka gear, plug for you, Mark, and tell us what your essential equipment list is, down to the brand. Well, I'm just going to start off real quick. We've been using a product called Nose Jammer, and it's like a vanilla extract or something like that. I don't know the science of it. You'll have to look into it. But you spray it on your boots and on your clothing and stuff when you walk in, and it's supposed to overwhelmed their olfactory senses or whatever. And we're finding that it is working, and it is working very well. I don't know. We haven't been busted coming in. We've had deer come in from our access route. They've crossed our paths, and not one has blown at us or busted or even picked their head up to the 3-year-old buck that Ryan passed last night crossed our path and didn't flinch.
Jeez. It's funny
that's one product right off the top of my head.
You're like the fourth person in the last month who's mentioned Nose Jammer to me, and I kind of wrote it off originally just as a gimmick, but I keep on hearing over and over and over. So literally on the way down here to Ohio, I was trying to find a sporting goods store to stop at and try to buy some. I didn't yet, but between you and the couple of people that have told me about it in the last week or two, you've got me convinced I need to try it. So I will. I'll be testing out the Nose Jammer too.
Right. All right. So now it's your turn. What's a product that you're loving?
Product that I'm loving right now. Oh, geez.
Well, how about this? What's kind of a product that you rely on?
I feel like I'm not going to beat on the dead horse because we talk about ozonics seems like every episode. So that's something I rely on a lot, but I won't talk about it anymore. I don't know. I don't really use a whole lot of products, Dan.
We'll just put it this way. Yeah.
I mean, I've got a few things in the tree with me. I've got an ozonics machine. I've got my camouflage. I've got my bow. I'm sitting in a tree stand, and I carry one grunt tube, some rattling antlers, and a wind checker, and that's basically it. We use scent eliminating sprays and different things like that, but there's not any one. I have certain brands I like and use and stuff, but there's not any special secret product or anything I think I'm using that's helping me, night and day, changing how I'm hunting. I think there's a lot of good products out there, and there's certain brands and products I trust and that I use, and I'm very happy with. But I do think sometimes people get too caught up on gear and thinking that makes or breaks how they hunt. And I think, and I'm not trying to sell short any of these really great companies out there. There's lots of really good gear out there, but I just think at the same time, there's guys who are killing really big deer using some stuff from the 80s. So when it comes down to it, I don't think we use gear as a crutch when lots of times we don't need to. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I don't think gear has anything to do with it. And any bow with any broadhead placed in the right spot will kill a deer. Any camo any camo in the tree, if you're not moving, you have the opportunity to kill a deer. There are things like, we talk about ozonics all the time, blah, blah, blah. We feel that's something innovative that we talk about. But back to all the basics, there are people killing giant deer every year who are in jeans and hooded sweatshirts. So, it is what it is kind of thing.
Yeah, and there's definitely things that help, certain bows might shoot better than other bows, or there will be a certain set of camouflage that you feel works best for you, or I feel works best for me, and there certainly is. I've got my preferences, and I think that there's certain things that give me an advantage, but, to each their own. The example of like the bow, shooting a bow is, there's a lot of really great bow companies out there. I shoot a bear bow. I absolutely love it. And, that's what I feel really confident shooting. But I know you shoot, I think you shoot an Elite, and I'm sure you feel really good shooting that bow, and you're really happy with that bow. And I'm sure there's guys out there that shoot Hoyts, and they love their bow. And I think for a lot of these different types of gear purchases, it comes down to more so, what's the right fit for you personally. And
what you're comfortable with.
Yeah. And so I think it comes down to give some different things a try, find what works for you, find what you're comfortable with, find what company ethos or brand or whatever you feel like you identify the most with, and then go with that. Don't let I'll leave it at that.
Don't let T-Bone tell you that the that the can cookers are the best crock pot on the market.
Well, now he's not going to come on the show, Dan.
Oh, he will.
All right. So what do you think about this? Paul Shu, I think is how you pronounce his last name, brings up a great question. He asks, if a hot doe passes out of range with bucks in tow, in what situation would you pick up and move to take advantage of that versus hanging tight and staying where you're at? So when you see bucks chasing a doe, do you move to get in there where they were, or do you stick it out where you are and hope that they come back closer to you? What do you do, Dan?
Well, unfortunately, if a doe is being dogged by one or several bucks, it's an irregular movement. So statistically, she's probably not going to come back in that same location again. If you already feel that you're in the best spot, stay in that spot. I wouldn't be, this time of year, like we mentioned, it's chaos in the timber. There's no pattern, A doe is going to do anything that she can to get away from these bucks if she's not ready to breed or has already been bred. So there's no rhyme or reason that she's doing what she's doing. She just feels pressure from these bucks and she wants to get away from them.
Yeah, I think I agree mostly with what you said. Yep. That's most of what I've seen. And so I usually don't pick up and relocate after seeing something like that. But I have heard repeatedly from a lot of other really good hunters that have seen does circle when they've been being chased for long periods of time. I have heard lots of times about cases where they'll circle back through the same general area a couple times. And in those situations, if that's true, if that happens, it might be worth moving in and trying to get into that area. But I in my experience, I have not seen that myself. So I tend to, I tend to stick it out where I am and trust my instincts on why I originally sat there. Now, to another point you said, though, Dan, you mentioned the fact that, during this time of year, the woods is chaos and there's no patterns to anything going on. Mm-hmm. And that's right, commonly held belief. But to a degree, that is wrong. And when I say wrong, it's true, right? There's a lot of chaos in the woods, but there is some level of a pattern that is going on. And I think we inherently know this. And research has recently shown this. I can't remember if this is on our regular podcast, Dan, that this was discussed, or if it was on the Rules of the Rut podcasts. But Steve Bartilla had talked about this. We had him on the show as a guest a few weeks back. And he talked about the fact that he does believe that you can pattern deer during the rut, that you can pattern bucks during the rut. And that he's repeatedly seen it. He's seen these same big mature deer during the rut continue returning to certain areas. And there was recent research done in Texas where they put GPS collars on a bunch of bucks and monitored their movements during the rut, and they found the same thing. And it makes sense. And what they found is that almost all bucks have a certain number of what they called focal points, essentially hot spots that they came back to repeatedly every, I think it was 24 to 48 hours. They would cycle back to these spots over and over and over again. So they were repeating their movements. What they were doing is they were coming back to doe hotspots, doe bedding areas. So they would check a doe bedding area, move on to the next one, check that doe bedding area again, move on to the next spot, check that doe hotspot. And whenever they did pick up a hot doe or a doe they were interested in, then they'd chase and there'd be chaos and they'd run around and they would go off and on and, seemingly not on any type of patternable travel. But then, whenever that ended, or maybe he spent 24 hours with that doe and he's done with her and he's ready to move on to the next one, then he returns to that basic cycle. And this has been proven now. It sounds like in a number of studies. So I think the key is identifying in these cases when there's a buck that's utilizing your properties, is to recognize that they do have these focal points. If you can identify those focal points, you might have a chance at figuring out a very general idea of what this buck might do. Not that he's not going to be doing it every day, that you're going to be able to see, but in lots of cases, if you're in that core area, these bucks are staying closer to home than I think a lot of us originally believed. And of course, there are some of those different excursions where they take off here and take off there, but they're a little more consistent than I think, most of us have always talked about.
Right. And I agree with what you said as far as, the focal points, but in regards to Paul's question, I wouldn't be moving a stand based on one hot doe running through your area.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm not saying, well, I guess my response was not to make a decision based off one thing you see in the woods. Go with what, the history of that area has shown you in previous years. If you think a doe's coming back to the same area, stick to that area. Don't be moving a stand because you saw a hot doe run across the ridge. One day. So.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that one, Dan. Well, what else do you think we should cover here, Dan? Any other questions here on the list that you want to tackle?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily a question, as it is more of a reminder. Today, I'll be honest with you, we were coming into an area. We were setting up. I had my safety harness on, and my tree stand slipped. And, nothing bad really happened, but I had to step up on another branch while Ryan adjusted my tree stand for me so I could get back on it. And what my point is, as we start hunting, we get tired, we get frustrated, we start to lose sight of maybe what we think are simple but are actually the most important things, like our safety and other people's safety, to really slow down and check your gear, make sure it's working right, shoot your bow, make sure you're doing the right thing, not only for your safety but as far as the hunt is concerned too. Don't take shortcuts. Don't slack because you're tired or I don't know. Just use your brain and slow down and make sure you're thinking soundly before you do make a decision, or you do go into a new spot, or check the winds. Put all the information you have together. I know this is kind of one big thing, but I don't know. It's just something that kind of crossed my mind. I probably stepped on my tree stand without really checking on it today. And, some of it was probably because I was tired. Some of it was probably because I was in a hurry. But nothing bad happened, but you never know. It's one of those things where anything can happen at any moment.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think, like you said, it's especially this time of year where a lot of us are on a vacation or something where we're hunting for 7 days in a row or 14 days in a row or whatever, and we're putting really long hours in. It's easy to get sloppy. It's easy to get tired, and
yep.
Whether that's with something related to safety, like in your case, or if it's, when it comes to execution of your hunting strategy, or maybe you're tired and you I just want to get back home. I'm just going to walk right through the middle of that field coming out of the stand at night, or whatever it might be. We need to remind ourselves that you can't be sloppy even during the rut. These are still smart animals.
Yep.
And then, things outside of the hunting point too. You got to make sure you're being careful, being smart, doing things the right way. So it's a beautiful, awesome, fun time of year, but it's not time of year where you can be lax with what you're doing either.
Right. And I think the very last thing for me would be, remember why you're doing this. I just remember the very first time I ever went on a bow hunt. I had a garage sale bow with every arrow was different, with every broadhead it was different. I think I was maybe 13 years old, and I got within like 5 yards. And probably it was a homemade tree stand built out of 2x4s and L brackets, iron L brackets. And I had such a blast, and I had so much fun. And now there's so much pressure I feel from Facebook and from others. There's a little bit of antler jealousy, so to speak, that remember why you started doing this in the first place, and have fun, because that's what this is all supposed to be about. It's supposed to be fun and relaxing, and you're supposed to enjoy yourself.
I think that's the most important reminder we can leave anyone with. And it's so ironic because, this is the time of year that, so many of us look forward to, all year for the rut. We're so amped up for this time period. And we talk about it and we can't wait. And I almost feel like it's because of all that hype and all those expectations that we put on ourselves about the rut that, at least for me, and I imagine from what you're saying and from what I've heard from other people, that a lot of other people feel this too. Like you said, there's a tremendous amount of pressure, and I end up getting, I wish I wasn't this way and I need to work on this, but I get more stressed out than at any other time of year. This time of year, this is when I'm the most frustrated and the most stressed out, and it's ridiculous because, like you said, we're supposed to be having fun with it. This is, what we have been looking forward to. So remembering why you're doing what you're doing is great advice. And yeah, it's funny. My wife actually texted me last night, she knows me pretty well. She just said something along the lines of, I know you're already getting frustrated and antsy, but she said exactly what you said, Dan. She said you need to remember why you do this, and you do this because you chose this challenge because it's just that, it's a challenge. So focus on the joy, focus on the adventure, and knowing that all these all the great accomplishments that eventually will come, they're worth the struggle. So I think have fun with it, and like you said, Facebook, I think there's a lot of Facebook envy out there, and seeing everyone else killing their deer, I think that weighs on people, and just have fun with it and don't get too stressed out. And I'm more guilty than this of probably anyone, so this is me preaching to myself. But it's a mental game. I know we talked about this last week, but I think the rut in general, it's all about, stick to the basics. For me, it's hunt those couple core areas, put in your time, hunt hard, and stay positive, stay focused, keep the right attitude. And if you can grind it out and do all those things, while still making sure you're having fun, enjoying yourself, you can have success. And even if maybe it's not in the cards and you don't kill your buck, but if you focus on having the right attitude, you're still gonna have a good time doing it. And I think that's the most important thing here. So I don't know.
A successful season doesn't necessarily have to end with a kill.
Exactly. So I think that's a good place for us to leave things here, Dan. I don't know. I hope, I think we kind of rambled all over the world on this one, Dan. I hope it was still useful. Hope it was useful to people. And I know that you're talking on a cell phone in southern Iowa at your parents' place, and I'm in a random hotel room. So I hope that everything turned out okay. But we're doing our best here in the middle of the rut to keep the podcast going. So we're gonna keep at it, and we hope that you guys out there listening do too, and hope you're hunting hard and having a blast. So Dan, if you don't have anything else, I will. I think we're gonna wrap it up. What do you say?
I think that's good. I just wish everybody who's listening good luck, and I hope all your wildest whitetail dreams come true.
I like it. I feel like now we should have the Disney theme song playing or something. Or like, all right, well, then let's close the show down here. So that said, thank you guys all for being here with us today. If you've enjoyed the podcast, as we always ask, we really appreciate it if you can leave us a rating or review on iTunes. It helps a ton, and already 102 of you have done that, and gosh, we appreciate it. I go on there and read the reviews, and just love hearing what you guys think about the show, and I'm so glad to hear that you're enjoying it and that we're helping you out. I've gotten so many cool messages and tweets and Facebook emails and stuff just talking about how people are enjoying the podcast on their drive to work, or a guy sent a message saying that he was on a flight from Houston up to Wisconsin and was listening to the podcast, and it was helping him get through the flight, looking forward to hunting and stuff. So that's just so cool, and I'm just privileged and honored and excited to know that people are enjoying what we're doing here. So thank you for that. Speaking of thanks, as always, we always want to thank our partners who do help make this show possible and keep us on the air. So big thanks to Sitka Gear, Trophy Ridge, Bear Archery, Redneck Blinds, Carbon Express Arrows, Huntsoft, Lacrosse Boots, Big & J Long Range Attractants, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. Thank you all so much for joining us here today on the Wired to Hunt podcast. And I hope that the rut hunting, like Dan said, I hope your whitetail dreams are coming true. Hope the hunting has been good. And I hope you guys have some really, really awesome encounters in the days to come. So good luck out there, and stay wired to hunt.